My name is Viola Thompson, and this is the story of how my own son tried to take everything from me: my money, my home, my dignity, and how I reminded him exactly who he was dealing with. It's a story of betrayal, quiet strength, and the kind of comeback that only comes when you've had enough. So, grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me take you back to the moment my world turned upside down. Because what happened next, it's something you won't forget. It was the summer I turned 74. The air was thick, the kind of sticky heat that clings to your skin and makes you feel like you're moving through molasses. I'd just come in from watering my tomato plants, their green leaves curling slightly under the relentless sun. I was proud of those plants. I'd coaxed them from tiny seeds, watched them grow strong and tall, just like I'd done with my son, Malcolm, all those years ago. But that morning, something felt off. I stood by the kitchen counter, gripping the edge, when a wave of dizziness hit me. I chalked it up to skipping breakfast, nothing serious, just a moment of weakness. But the next thing I knew, I was on the floor, the cool linoleum pressing against my cheek. My neighbor, Mrs. Harrove, was fanning me with a church bulletin, her face pale with worry. She'd seen me collapse through the window. An ambulance came, sirens blaring through our quiet street. The hospital kept me overnight, running tests, poking and prodding. Just dehydration. They said, drink more water, rest, and you'll be fine. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. But Malcolm, my only child, the boy I'd raised through fevers and spelling bees, the one who used to call me Mama Bear, he saw that moment as something else, an opportunity. The next morning, he showed up at the hospital with a bouquet of fake flowers, plastic petals that looked too perfect to be real, and a stack of concern I hadn't seen since his wedding day. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk about your safety. What if you'd been alone longer? What if Mrs. Harrove hadn't been there?" His questions weren't questions at all. They were accusations, each one laced with a subtle superiority, like he was waiting for me to admit I couldn't handle my own life. I just listened, my hands folded in my lap, the hospital blanket scratchy against my skin. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. Maybe I should have. A few days after I came home, Malcolm showed up again, this time with a banker in tow. Greg, he called him, a young man with slicked back hair and teeth so white they looked like they belonged in a toothpaste ad. Greg carried a folder, already prepared, as if he'd known exactly what he was walking into. "It's just temporary." "Mom," Malcolm said, guiding me to the kitchen table, his hand on my elbow like I was a fragile thing that might break. "Power of attorney. You know, in case anything happens again. I'll just be authorized to help with your accounts." His words were smooth, practiced, but they landed heavy in my chest. I didn't like the sound of it. Power of attorney. That was for people who couldn't think for themselves, who couldn't manage their own lives. I'd paid off my mortgage before Malcolm even graduated college. I kept a little notebook, leather-bound and worn at the edges, where I tracked every dollar that came in and went out. My balance was precise, down to the cent. I didn't grow up with much, so I learned early how to stretch what little I had. I wasn't the kind of woman who needed help, but Malcolm was my son, my only child, the boy I'd wrapped in a towel after his first swimming lesson, the one who'd cried when he lost his favorite toy truck. He rubbed my back as I signed the papers, his touch warm but somehow distant. "I'll handle things until you're feeling stronger," he said, his wife, Trisha brought over a pot of soup that smelled like it came from a can. Her smile too wide, her voice too bright. "We're just looking out for you. Mama V," she said, like it was a nickname she'd earned. At first, I didn't notice the changes. My mail still arrived, stacked neatly in the mailbox. My purse still held my debit card, my PIN scrawled on a slip of paper tucked inside. Life seemed normal, or as normal as it could be after a hospital stay. But then, one morning, I went to the grocery store. My neighbor had asked for homemade rolls, and I needed flour and yeast. I stood at the checkout, the cashier's fingers tapping impatiently on the register, and swiped my debit card. Declined. I frowned, tried again. Declined. My cheeks burned as I fumbled for my emergency credit card. That one went through, but I stood there, shaking, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I called Malcolm from the parking lot, my voice steady, but my heart racing. "Not to worry, Mom," he said, his tone light, like he was explaining something to a child. I moved some things around, just streamlining everything. "You don't really need to handle that anymore." Those words, "you don't need to handle that anymore," cut deeper than I expected. They weren't just words. They were a dismissal, a declaration that I was no longer capable, no longer in charge. From that moment, things spiraled. Malcolm started showing up with printouts, monthly summaries he'd made, charts and numbers that looked like they belonged in a boardroom, not my kitchen. He'd sit across from me, explaining my own finances like I was a client, not his mother. When I asked about a missing bank statement, he waved it off. "We're going paperless now, Mom. It's more modern. Besides, it's not like you read all those pages." I let that one go, but the sting lingered. Then he took my debit card. "Just so you don't misplace it again," he said, slipping it into his wallet like it was nothing. He set up a joint checking account for emergencies, but never gave me access. When I called my insurance provider to ask about my premiums, they told me the point of contact had been changed to Malcolm. That's when I started writing things down again. Dates, names, amounts, every detail I could remember. I kept the notebook hidden inside a cookbook no one ever touched, its pages filled with my neat handwriting, a quiet rebellion against the life they were trying to impose on me. Trisha didn't help. She'd come by, her heels clicking on my hardwood floors, and make jokes that weren't funny. "You still balancing that little checkbook? Mama V. How vintage?" They'd laugh, her and Malcolm, like I was some quaint relic from another time. I didn't laugh. One day, I mentioned wanting a new winter coat. The one I had was fraying at the cuffs, and I'd been saving for something warm and sturdy. Malcolm shook his head. "Not in the budget right now. Mom, my own money? Not in the budget." That's when it hit me. They hadn't just moved things around. They'd taken over. They were managing me, like I was one of Malcolm's clients or worse, like I was too feeble to think straight. "You don't remember how cold it was last year?" I asked him, my voice sharp. He smiled, a patronizing curve of his lips, like I'd proved his point. "Exactly, Mom. That's why we're helping." They started making decisions about my house, too. The house I'd paid for, the one where I'd raised Malcolm, where I'd mourned my husband, where every corner held a memory. "This place is too big," Trisha said one day, walking through my living room like she was staging it for a sale. "Wouldn't it be better to move into something cozier? We could help sell this and get everything settled." That word again, help. It wasn't help. It was control. And then came the allowance. Malcolm called it monthly discretionary support, a prepaid card with $150 loaded onto it, like I was a teenager begging for pocket money. That was the last straw. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at the budget sheet Malcolm had left behind. My name was in bold at the top, but the numbers, they didn't belong to me anymore. I looked around my home, and felt like a guest, a tolerated guest. I hadn't lost my memory. I hadn't lost my mind, but I was losing my freedom, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I called Reggie. Reggie is my nephew, my sister's boy, who'd spent summers in my house growing up. He was in IT now, living in Raleigh. A good man with a quiet strength I'd always admired. We kept in touch through birthday calls and Christmas cards, but we hadn't spoken at length in years. When I called, he picked up on the third ring. "Reggie," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "I need your help." He didn't ask what for. He didn't ask why. He just said, "I'll be there Thursday." That night, I sat in the dark, the budget sheet still on the table, and felt something shift inside me. Malcolm thought he could erase me, reduce me to a line item in his plans, but he was about to find out exactly who he was dealing with. Reggie arrived that Thursday, just after noon, wearing his usual pressed jeans and a Carolina Panthers hoodie. He hugged me tight, his arms strong and familiar, and didn't say a word until we were seated at the dining table. I handed him my notebook, its pages filled with the evidence of my son's betrayal. He flipped through it slowly, his eyes narrowing as he read. "You've been tracking all of this?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. I never stopped. I said, "They just hoped I would." He pulled a silver laptop from his backpack and got to work. While I brewed tea, the kettle hissing softly, he typed furiously, logging into accounts I hadn't touched in months. My old passwords didn't work. Malcolm had changed everything. Reggie ran a trace on my social security number, his fingers moving with a precision that made me proud. That's when we found it. 4 accounts closed, 2 others rerouted under something called Thompson Legacy Holdings. My name wasn't even listed as a secondary owner. It was all under Malcolm. "He created a shell company," Reggie said, turning the screen toward me, "and he's been using your money to fund it." My throat went dry. I leaned in, staring at the numbers. $88,000 gone. $88,000 money I'd saved, scrimped, sacrificed for. I sat back, my hands folded in my lap, my palms cold. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just asked the only thing that mattered. "Can we get it back?" Reggie looked me in the eye, his gaze steady. "If we have records, and I know a good lawyer, yes. But you have to be careful. You can't tip him off yet." I nodded. "I've been careful my whole life." I said, "What do we do next?" Reggie helped me download a small app on a spare phone, a burner I kept in a drawer for emergencies. He taught me how to screen record, how to capture every word, every slip. Anytime he says something shady, record it. He said, "Don't confront him. Just keep gathering." I followed his instructions to the letter. Over the next few weeks, I played the part they expected. I complimented Trisha's cooking, even when it tasted like it came from a box. I asked Malcolm how his business was doing. My voice light, my eyes soft. I even thanked him for taking care of everything. The words bitter on my tongue. But every time he slipped, every time he mentioned my portfolio or the equity in the house, I tapped the red button on my burner phone and saved it all. One day, he sat across from me in my living room, his posture relaxed, his smile smug. "You know, Mom," he said, "it's honestly better this way. You don't have to worry about a thing. You get to enjoy life. No stress." I smiled. Sweet as sugar. You're right, baby, I said. I'm just so lucky to have a son like you. He grinned and patted my hand, like I was a confused old lady who didn't know any better. He had no idea he was digging his own grave. By the end of that week, Reggie returned with a folder thicker than a church hymnal. "This is everything," he said, setting it on the table. Account movements, email traces, IP logs, phone call transcripts, every piece of evidence we'd collected. I looked at it all, my fingers tracing the edges of the pages, and felt that familiar click in my brain. The one I used to feel when I caught a student cheating on an exam back when I taught math for 37 years. It was the sound of clarity, of truth snapping into place. I opened a drawer in the hallway, pulled out a dusty red folder, and handed it to Reggie. "What's this?" he asked. "My original will," I said, "and the contact for my attorney. Her name is Cassandra Wynne. I haven't needed her in years, but I'm thinking it's time." I called Cassandra the next morning. She picked up on the second ring, her voice smooth and sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Viola Thompson," she said, a smile in her tone. "I was wondering when you'd call me again. What's going on?" I took a breath. "Someone's stealing from me," I said, "and it's my own son." She didn't gasp. She didn't hesitate. "How soon can you get to my office?" I was there by noon. Cassandra looked exactly as I remembered: tight natural curls, gold-rimmed glasses, red lipstick that said she meant business. I gave her everything: Reggie's folder, my old documents, the recordings. She read through it all, page by page, her expression unreadable. Then she set the folder down and looked at me. "We're not going to confront them," she said. "We're going to let them trap themselves." She laid out her plan with the precision of a general. First, she'd file for an emergency financial review and draft a legal injunction to freeze any further moves. Meanwhile, I'd act like nothing was wrong. Keep playing the role of the docile mother they thought I was. The goal? To give Malcolm enough rope to hang himself. Cassandra also updated my will. Everything, my home, my savings, my insurance, would be moved into a trust in my name only, with clear provisions in case of mental incapacitation. She appointed Reggie as the secondary executor. "You still have full control," she said, "but we've added layers so this never happens again." I nodded, overwhelmed but steady. "And if they try to move me?" I asked. Cassandra leaned in, her eyes fierce. "Call me. I'll have that injunction filed within an hour. If they try to relocate you, declare you unfit, or sell property without your consent, we'll bury them." I walked out of her office with a new will in my purse and fire in my chest. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. At home, Trisha was sitting on my porch steps, scrolling on her phone, oblivious to the world. "Hey, Mama V," she said, not even looking up. "Malcolm's talking about listing the house soon. The market's hot." I smiled, my voice calm, my heart steady. "Oh, is it now? Well, we'll just have to see what the future holds." She didn't notice the edge in my tone. She never did. Inside, I folded the new will and placed it in a fresh envelope. I locked it in the drawer where I kept my birth certificate, the weight of it grounding me. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to protect me. This time, I was protecting myself. By the time Christmas decorations started appearing in the grocery store, I had enough evidence to fill a drawer. Malcolm thought he was clever, using big words, talking fast, acting like I couldn't keep up. But I'd been watching people like him my whole life. You don't teach math for 37 years, raise a classroom full of teenagers, and grade tests until your fingers cramp without learning how to spot a liar. Reggie came by again in mid-November, this time with a printer and a portable scanner. "You need hard copies of everything," he said. "Digital stuff can disappear if they try anything slick." We spent the afternoon printing every screenshot, every bank transaction, every email with Malcolm's name on it. One email thread stopped me cold. Malcolm had been corresponding with a private real estate consultant, discussing the sale of my house not hypothetically, but actively. There were digital renderings of what the place could look like once the elderly occupant is moved out. That was me, the elderly occupant. And then, in another document, I found an appraisal form signed electronically with my name. It had been submitted 2 weeks ago. I'd never seen it. "He forged your signature," Reggie said, his voice tight. "That's a crime. Auntie V?" I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink until my pulse slowed. I'd taught Malcolm right from wrong. I'd raised him to be better than this, but he'd chosen his path, and now I'd choose mine. Malcolm came by the next day, Saturday, like clockwork, as if I were a patient on his rounds. He walked in without knocking, carrying a box of organic groceries I hadn't asked for. Trisha trailed behind, chattering about her new side hustle selling custom pillows on Etsy. He sat on my couch, smiled like he was doing me a favor, and said, "So, Mom, we need to have a real talk about your future. You've done so much for this family, and we think it's time you really relax. No more worrying about bills, upkeep, any of that." I blinked slowly, my face calm. "Go on," I said. "There's this beautiful senior community just outside the city," he continued. "Silver Pines, it's got everything: gardens, activity rooms, nurses on site. They even do bingo on Wednesdays." He chuckled, like bingo was some grand prize. "We already toured it." "You'd love it," Trisha added, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "And the best part, we can finally get that antique furniture appraised. Some of it might be valuable, just sitting here collecting dust." I looked at them, my heart steady, my hands still. I had everything I needed now. So I said the only thing that wouldn't give me away, "That sounds lovely, baby." "When were you thinking?" "Early January," Malcolm said, leaning back, confident. "We're just waiting for a couple of offers to come in, but don't worry, we'll handle the move." I smiled. Of course. That night, I called Cassandra from the old flip phone she'd given me. "They're moving forward," I said. "They're planning to relocate me and sell the house." Her voice was crisp, unwavering. "Then it's time. I'll file the injunction tomorrow. Let them play into it. We'll make this public if we need to." The next morning, I opened my mailbox and found a Christmas card from Malcolm and Trisha. It was a photo of them on a yacht, Malcolm in sunglasses, Trisha with a sun hat and a glass of something bubbly. Inside, in neat print, it read, "Happy holidays from the future Mr. and Mrs. Thompson Estate. No mention of me." I tore the card in half, dropped it in the trash, and poured myself a cup of coffee. I opened the curtains and stared out at my front lawn. Every blade of grass, every crack in the driveway, every rusted piece of the old porch swing, it was mine, and it was going to stay that way. Malcolm didn't come by the next weekend. He sent a text, saying he was busy with year-end financials. Trisha posted a photo of their living room on social media, captioned, "Manifesting a new space soon. Goodbye. Old energy." They thought they'd won. They thought I was out of the way, a problem solved, a burden managed. But I was just getting started. I spent the next week preparing with Cassandra. She froze any further account transfers, filed the fraud complaint, the forged signature report, and the injunction to block the house sale. Reggie set up hidden cameras in my hallway, just in case they tried to move me without consent. Every angle was covered. Then Cassandra looked at me, her eyes bright with determination. "Thanksgiving is coming up," she said. "Invite them. Say nothing. Let them bring their smug smiles and their grand plans. We'll handle the rest." I smiled. "You sure?" She leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And just like that, it became a countdown. I cleaned the house until it sparkled. I baked cornbread and sweet potato pie, the kitchen filling with the warm scent of cinnamon and home. I set the table with the good china, the set I hadn't used since my husband's funeral. I even pulled out Malcolm's old place card from his high school graduation. Its edges yellowed, and set it next to the wine glass. Trisha called the night before. "We'll bring dessert," she said. "Hope you don't mind. I invited a few friends. They've been dying to see the house before we make changes." "Oh, not at all," I said, my voice warm. "The more, the merrier." I hung up, sat in my favorite chair, and let myself feel it, the peace, the power. Malcolm thought he had the upper hand, but tomorrow, he'd find out exactly who raised him, and what happens when a mother stops playing nice. Thanksgiving morning was quiet, gray, a soft drizzle tapping at the kitchen window. I stirred the gravy, the turkey roasting in the oven, the pies cooling on the rack. I put on my cream-colored cardigan, the one Malcolm once said made me look too old-fashioned. I wore it anyway, the soft fabric a reminder of who I was. I sat at the table and waited. They arrived at 1:15, late as usual. Malcolm barged in, holding a store-bought cheesecake and complaining about traffic. Trisha trailed behind, her faux fur vest out of place, her perfume too strong for a dinner table. They'd brought friends, 2 couples, strangers with polite smiles and eyes that scanned my home like it was already on the market. Malcolm's voice carried across the living room. "This place has great bones," he said, gesturing at the walls. "We could knock out this one, open up the kitchen, add value." He didn't look at me when he said it. Trisha nodded, running her hand across my mantle like she was already redecorating. I smiled. "Make yourselves comfortable. Dinner's almost ready." I set out the food, 1 dish at a time: turkey, stuffing, cranberry greens, cornbread last. When everyone was seated, Malcolm tapped his glass with a fork, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Before we eat," he said, standing, holding his wine like he was addressing a boardroom, "I want to say a few words. This year's been full of growth and hard decisions. Trisha and I have taken on new responsibilities, especially where family is concerned. As many of you know, we'll be moving Mom into Silver Pines in January." Trisha cut in, laughing. "Don't worry, it's gorgeous. She'll be pampered. She deserves it." One of their guests leaned forward, and the house Malcolm smiled, smug. "We're already entertaining offers. This place has been in the family for decades, but it's time for a new chapter." I stood then, not fast, not loud, but slow and steady. My movements deliberate. "Thank you, Malcolm," I said, my voice clear, cutting through the room. "But I have an announcement, too." He looked confused, just for a moment, like a magician upstaged at his own show. "I won't be moving to Silver Pines," I said. "In fact, I've already made arrangements elsewhere." Trisha blinked. "What?" "And this house," I continued, my eyes locked on Malcolm's. "It's already sold. I sold it last week. Closing papers are signed. Funds are secured in my private trust, which, by the way, you no longer have access to." The room fell silent. Forks stopped clinking. The strangers shifted uncomfortably. And then the front door opened. In walked Cassandra Wynne, her heels clicking against the hardwood, a leather folder under her arm. "Mrs. Thompson," she said warmly. "Everything is finalized. The injunction has been filed, the fraud report is active, and your updated will has been notarized." Tricia shot to her feet. "Who is this?" Cassandra smiled. Calm, but deadly. "I'm her attorney, and you're going to want to sit down." Malcolm's face went red. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "You signed over power of attorney?" I shook my head. "No." "Malcolm, you tricked me into signing a temporary document during a medical episode, and then you exploited it? That's not help. That's theft." Cassandra laid out the evidence copies of the fraud complaint, the forged appraisal form, the court motion to restore my financial control. "You used her identity to open an LLC," she said, her voice steady. "You drained over $80,000 from her accounts. You forged her signature to sell a home that didn't belong to you. That's multiple felonies." Tricia sat down, pale, her hands trembling. "You always said I wasn't sharp anymore," I told Malcolm, my voice low, unwavering. "But it turns out I was just quiet, and I let you show me exactly who you are." He stammered. "You don't understand. I was just trying to help." "No," I said. "You were trying to control. And now you've lost everything." Cassandra slid one final paper across the table. "You've also been removed from her estate permanently." His mouth fell open. "And just so we're clear," I added, "Reggie is the sole executor now. He'll make sure you never get near another dime of mine." For a full minute, no one spoke. Then Tricia stood, grabbed her purse, and muttered, "Come on, Malcolm, let's go." But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me, his world crumbling. Cassandra walked them to the door. "If either of you attempt to contact her again, we'll pursue harassment charges. Good night." The door closed behind them. And then I laughed. Not a loud laugh, but the kind that bubbles up from your chest after you've held it in too long. I looked around the table, the half-finished plates, the silent guests, the untouched wine. I picked up my fork and took a bite of sweet potato pie. It was delicious. Cassandra sat beside me, poured herself a glass of wine, and smiled. "That was beautiful," she said. "Poetic." I shrugged. He should have known better. After everyone left, I packed the leftovers, cleaned the kitchen with slow satisfaction. I tossed the fake cheesecake in the trash and scrubbed the counters until they gleamed. When I finished, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the rain stop, the air fresh and clean. I'd never felt freer. The court date came fast. Cassandra filed everything the Monday after Thanksgiving. By Friday, I was sitting in front of a judge, my cardigan draped over my shoulders, 3 folders in my lap. Malcolm showed up late, his suit ill-fitting, his eyes sunken. Tricia wasn't with him. I heard she'd gone to Atlanta, distancing herself from the mess he'd made. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The judge, a no-nonsense black woman with short curls and sharp glasses, read through the documents in silence. Cassandra laid out the timeline how I'd been misled, how Malcolm had rerouted my funds, forged my signature, planned to move me to a senior home to sell my house. Malcolm tried to interrupt. "Your Honor? She's confused. My mother's memory isn't what it used to be." The judge didn't look up. "I've reviewed the audio recordings. She doesn't sound confused." "You do." He sat down, deflated. The judge restored my control, revoked Malcolm's power of attorney, ordered him to pay $88,000 in restitution. plus interest and fees. The LLC was dissolved. Any future attempts to access my accounts would bring criminal charges. I walked out of the courtroom, shoulders high, Cassandra beside me. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was my life, my dignity, reclaimed. Cassandra drove me to the bank. The manager greeted me, wide-eyed. "Mrs. Thompson, we didn't know you were back in control." I smiled. "You do now. We corrected every document, reset every password, closed the joint account, opened a new one in my name only. Reggie was my emergency contact. Cassandra second. Malcolm was nowhere on the paper. By December, my house was protected under the new trust. My income was secure. I had a prepaid legal service and a new accountant Reggie vetted. Everything Malcolm touched was undone. He lost his job 2 weeks later. Word of the fraud spread through financial circles. Trisha filed for separation. Malcolm was left renting a duplex in a neighborhood he'd once called sketchy. His SUV repossessed, working part-time answering phones at a credit repair agency. The irony wasn't lost on me. I bought a 2-bedroom condo near Reggie. No stairs, no noisy neighbors, a garden out back where I grow tomatoes again. Every morning, I brew coffee, check my accounts, live my life on my terms. Reggie visits Sundays, sometimes with his wife, Monique, and their daughter, Ela, who calls me Auntie V. One afternoon, Reggie asked, "Do you miss him?" I thought of the boy who brought me dandelions, who hugged me with both arms. "I miss who he used to be," I said, "but not who he became." That night, I sat by my window, the stars bright above. I didn't feel watched or doubted. I felt free. Christmas was quiet, spent with Reggie's family. Ela showed me every ornament on the tree, her eyes wide with wonder. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address. Malcolm's handwriting, sloppy, rushed. He wrote of his struggles, Trisha's departure, his losses. At the bottom, "I thought I was protecting you." I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and sat, thinking about protection that takes everything and calls it love. In January, I sold the last asset tied to Malcolm, a storage unit he'd used without permission. The money funded a scholarship in my husband's name, helping 4 first-generation students. By February, I had a routine coffee, music, journaling about who I was, who I'd always been. In March, Malcolm knocked on my door, thin, ashen, broken. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped outside, closed the door. "Not in my home," I said. We sat on the porch. He spoke of his losses, his regrets, his fear of losing me. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "Just wanted you to know I'm trying." I looked at him, his hands shaking. "You betrayed me," I said. "You turned me into a burden. You stole and called it protection. And still, you're my son, but you're no longer my legacy." He bowed his head. As I closed the door, he whispered, "I miss you, Mom." I paused. "I hope someday you'll grow into the man I raised." That was the last time we spoke. Now, my condo is peace. No tension, no stolen passwords. Just me, my name, my freedom. Reggie and Ela visit, bringing muffins, laughter, updates on the scholarship fund. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine. When people ask how I bounced back, I say, I didn't bounce, I stood up, and I never let anyone sit me down again. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of strength and truth. Drop a comment, tell me where you're tuning in from, what time it is, or share your own story. Your voice matters. It reminds me I'm not alone. And together, we're unstoppable. Thank you for listening.